So as I'm sure you can tell by the title of the video, today we are going to be discussing episodes 1 to 3 of the new Bridgerton prequel, Queen Charlotte. If you guys don't know what Bridgerton is, it is a popular Netflix series which is like a period drama. I think it's set in like 17 or 1800s or something, because Queen Charlotte is set in 1760 something or something, I think. So yeah, Bridgerton is set in like that kind of time period. So, you know, fancy dresses, balls, people being forced to marry one another, etc, etc. So currently we have seasons 1 to 2 of Bridgerton already out, and season 3 is on the way. And then they came out with Queen Charlotte. So like in terms of the order to watch them, I would suggest watching Bridgerton season 1 and 2 and then watching Queen Charlotte, or maybe even if season 3 is out already. I don't know if some of the events in Queen Charlotte will affect Bridgerton season 3, so maybe it's best to like watch it in the order, but I would say that you do have to watch Bridgerton before you watch Queen Charlotte, because there's a lot of like jumping between like the past and the future, or like the past and the present, I guess, if you're thinking in Bridgerton terms, because the original actress from the original actors from Bridgerton, who plays Queen Charlotte, we see some scenes with her, and we see some scenes with like Viscountess Bridgerton and Lady Danbury, like all of them as how they are in Bridgerton, and like some stuff is happening there. So yeah, if you did just go straight into Queen Charlotte, you would have no idea who these people are, and then you would get spoiled if you wanted to go back and watch Bridgerton. So yeah, I would definitely say you have to watch Bridgerton before you watch Queen Charlotte. And if you haven't watched Bridgerton, what have you been doing? Although I'm not sure how I feel about season 3, like it's not out yet, but the fact we know who Lady Whistledown is, and I'm like, and like the ship that's gonna be happening, I'm like, I thought we were supposed to be in Benedict, but apparently not, so I am very salty about that. Like, we want Benedict. Anyways, so a little non-spoilery overview for those people who haven't seen Bridgerton. Basically, we have Queen Charlotte, or she's not queen yet. We have Charlotte, who is a German princess, and she's been betrothed to King George of England, and this is how their like love story, I guess, like commences. And also we dive into how people of color became part of the ton, which is like their like upper class society, which is currently only for white people in Queen Charlotte. So we get to explore the, oh my gosh, what is that word? Immolation? What the hell is that? There we go. Amalgamation of people of color and white people becoming an equal part of society. So basically we explore all of the struggles with this, and we get into the characters who we are familiar with from Bridgerton and a couple of other characters. So yeah, that was a little like kind of non-spoilery thing, but didn't really tell you anything. But all I can say is, yeah, just go watch it, you will enjoy. So yeah, I don't really think there is anything else to say that's like non-spoilery, so we're just gonna dive right into the spoilers. I am only going to be speaking about episodes 1 to 3 in this video, because otherwise it would literally go on for ages, and my editing is long enough already because I just speak for like an abnormally long amount of time. So apologies to also, well, editing me and you guys, because I just ramble, so I'm sorry. But anyways, yes, let's dive into episode 1. Okay, so the first point, which I feel like is the most important point to note, at the very beginning of the episode, we are given a disclaimer, which I feel like some people might not have read or like understood what it said. So yeah, we're gonna start off with this very important point. So we begin with a black screen. Lady Whistledown speaking. Text comes on the screen. She says, "Dearest gentle reader, this is a story of Queen Charlotte from Bridgerton. This is not a history lesson. This is fiction inspired by fact. All liberties taken by the author are quite intentional." So evidently the most important points here are that this is not a history lesson, so this is not going to be historically accurate. This is fiction inspired by the events of like the real Queen Charlotte and King George. And I say this because I have seen like so many people like complaining about this not being historically accurate, but it literally tells you at the start of the show. So I don't know why you would go in expecting it to be historically accurate, because it tells you straight off the bat this will not be. So all I will say to the people who have been saying that is just like maybe go back and like watch the first like 10 seconds where it like tells you this. So yeah. But anyways, so the episode begins with Princess Charlotte of Mecklenburg Strelitz. That is definitely not how you say it. Oh my gosh, I am so sorry to the German language, because that is evidently not how you say it, so I apologize. How do you actually say it though?
In English, Mecklenburg Strelitz.
Mecklenburg Strelitz. There we go. Totally said that the whole time. So yeah, we are introduced to Princess Charlotte, and she is being signed away by her brother into a betrothal contract to the King of England, which she is not happy about. And I mean, like, fair enough. You are being like sold to a random man that you've never met in your life. So kick off, Queen. After that, whilst her and her brother are in the carriage from Germany on the way to England, Charlotte is obviously complaining about having to marry George. And like, side note, I just have to say that the way she like looks and speaks in comparison to like the original actress from Bridgerton who plays the Queen, oh, the casting was like spot on. Like, it is amazing. So props to whoever like cast her, all the casting department. Oh, amazing. And obviously also to the actress herself, like, she does an amazing job. So yeah. But anyways, so she's complaining about having to marry him. She's complaining about her corset being like too tight, she can't move. So, oh, honestly, she's just not having a good luck. But yeah, her brother is like, blah, 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 shut up. And I was like, shut up is like such a modern term, which they don't, to my recollection, even use in Bridgerton. So like, if they're going by like the historical bits that they like use in Bridgerton, it's like on the same lines, and I don't think they've ever said shut up. Like, they usually are like, be quiet, blah blah blah. So to have him say that, I was like, whoa, okay, that was random. But yeah, that's not the only first time like something has happened and I'm like, ooh, but like, that didn't even happen in Bridgerton. So yeah, there's a couple things, but I'll talk about that later. But yeah, anyways, he tells her to like shut up. And I was like, dude, you've just literally like signed her off to marry some random, like, shut up yourself. Then, this is like completely random, but we cut forward to the future, to the original actress who plays Queen Charlotte from Bridgerton. And this like whole cutting back and forward like keeps happening throughout this series, and honestly I thought it was so unnecessary. Like, it just takes you out of where you're meant to be with like young Charlotte and George, and then suddenly boom, you're with like people from Bridgerton like however many years later. And I just thought it was like very unnecessary. Like, I don't know why they included that. Like, nothing really happened that would warrant them like including all these scenes from like the future. So I don't know if they just ran out of stuff to like include for the show when they were younger, but yeah, I don't know. They could have literally explored so much more if they just didn't have these random scenes like cutting back and forth. Like, yeah, that was a bit annoying. But anyways, so we're with the Queen in the future, and Lady Whistledown is criticizing the Queen for not having any heirs from any of her 13 children. And she's saying this because the Queen's grandchild and her son's wife had just passed away during childbirth, and Lady Whistledown is somehow turning this into like the Queen's fault for some reason. And I'm like, hello, lady has just passed away from childbirth, like, have some compassion. And the fact that we know who Lady Whistledown is, I'm like, would she really be saying that? Like, surely that's like a bit below the belt. But anyways, so yeah, I don't know. Lady Whistledown was just being like such an ass during this. So yeah. But anyways, we cut back to young Charlotte. She's arrived in the palace. She's being inspected by the king's mother, the Dowager Princess. She's basically inspecting Charlotte. She grabs her hips and she was like,
you will make good babies for my son.
Like, honestly, oh, could you imagine having to like live back in those days and you're like, this is your job, just have babies, you have no other purpose, like, that's it. Ugh. So we already don't like the king's mother already because she's literally such a snob, and just like, you can just tell like straight away, we're like, oh, I don't like her. And then this next bit makes you absolutely hate her because it is literally so racist, it's unreal. She puts her thumb to Charlotte's face and tries to wipe off the color of her skin. It was honestly disgusting, and obviously I am not a person of color, so I am not the person to speak on this, so that is all I will say on it. But I just had to say that the fact they thought, and that people still do think, that behavior like that is acceptable is honestly disgusting and so unacceptable. So yeah, that was just like so bad to watch. And then after this horrible racist encounter, we have a very different scene. It's very upbeat and it introduces one of my favorite characters. So after seeing the Queen, Charlotte's dismissed, she's walking up the stairs and she's like being stalked by this like royal servant. So she keeps walking and she's like, who is this weirdo following me? So she obviously turns around and like confronts him, and we find out his name is Brimsley. And if you've watched Bridgerton, you'll know that the Queen's like most trusted like advisor and person who like she always has like standing behind her is Brimsley. Insert a picture right here of, well, both of them. This is young Brimsley. This is old Brimsley. And we obviously prefer young Brimsley because he's so cute. So yes, adorable. But basically he tells her he will always be 5 paces behind her, like at all times. And she's like, okay, anyways, tell me about the king. And he's like, he is the king. And she's like, yes. And he's like, he is the ruler of Great Britain, Ireland, and the colonies. So totally like avoiding her question. So yeah, she gets nothing out of him. He like walks down the stairs and then proceeds to follow her at 5 steps like all the time. And I'm like, how would you do that? Like, what if she stops and you like take a step? Don't know. So yeah, it was cute to see how they met, considering they are still like friends, or well, not friends, but they're still like together, I guess, in Bridgerton. So after that funny little interaction, we cut back to the king's mother in a room with like all these men, and they're all like staring at each other awkwardly. And then she's like looking at this one lord or whatever he is, and is like, you did not tell me that Charlotte would be so brown. I mean, like, seriously, do these people hear themselves? So disgusting. So she is basically saying that the color of her skin is like a massive problem, but then she like has this like epiphany or something that everything is only a problem if the palette says it's a problem, so it must look intentional. So they then decide, out of the goodness of their hearts, or whatever, to expand the guest list to people of colour so they can be included in the Queen's court at the royal wedding, which, mind you, is 6 hours away. And the fact that they are like, we're adding them to her court, like, is like clearly emphasizing the divide that currently exists between the people of colour and those who are not. And then the next scene we jump to, I was literally like, what the hell? We see young Lady Danbury being like screwed by this like old man who I literally thought was like her dad or her granddad. He was like that old and crusty. Nothing against the actor, of course. And she is clearly not enjoying the experience, but after she finishes that with her husband, she gets told that they are invited to the royal wedding, which of course she is shooketh because there's not yet been any mixing between the people of colour and those who are not, like, in society, in like a official capacity, I guess. So yes, this is huge. So she has to go get ready to go to the royal wedding. So she gets to the royal wedding. We are in the chapel. Everyone is of course eyeing each other up because this has never happened before. And in a clear statement, the king's mother, when she enters the chapel, heads straight towards Mrs. and Mr. Danbury, because I just call her Lady Danbury because that's what she's called in Bridgerton, but at this point she is not actually Lady Danbury. So anyway, the king's mother heads over to them and is like, oh, it's so good to see you, Lord and Lady Danbury. So basically she just name drops them on the spot, gives them titles like in front of everyone, clearly like showing the change that's coming. She says all the ton must be titled and that it's time they were united as a society. So yes, all the prominent families of colour who were there get titles in front of everyone. So yeah, massive things going on in the church. So yes, that is how Lady Danbury got her title. She's a legend. I love her. So whilst that is happening in the chapel, we have Charlotte outside in the garden, like eyeing up this like tree that's like growing up the wall, and she plans to climb it because obviously she does not want to marry some random person who she's never met and who obviously no one will tell her anything about. So she proceeds to try like climbing up the vines. But then a handsome man, very handsome, asks if she's in need of any assistance, and she's like, yes man, I am in need of assistance. I do not want to marry the king because no one will speak of him, so he must be some sort of like beast or troll. So she proceeds to like demand him to like grab her by the waist and like hoist her like over the wall basically. And I'm like, in Bridgerton, like Daphne and Simon, it's like they can't even be left alone in the same room together, like they have to have a chaperone. So her running into a random man in the gardens and then asking him to like grab her waist, like that would never be allowed in Bridgerton. Like that would be like untoward and like, oh, scandal, they must have to marry, they've been caught alone. So like, why would she ask a random man to her then to like grab her? Like it didn't make any sense with like what happens in Bridgerton and then like what's happening here. And this is set before, so you would think it would be like way stricter in that sense, but yeah, that was very weird. But anyways, she asked the handsome man to like chuck her over the wall, and he's like, I will not be helping the woman who I am supposed to marry escape. Like, come on, we obviously knew this was George, like who else is it gonna be? So yeah, her face is obviously like, what the frick? And she goes to bow, and he like takes her hand to like stop her, and she like keeps calling him your majesty, and he's like, I'm just George. And then Charlotte's brother, oh, I hate that guy, I don't know, he just annoys me. He's just like so up his own ass. So yeah, he interrupts them and is like shouting at Charlotte like blah blah blah, get in the capsule or whatever. And George is like, no, Charlotte is still deciding whether she wants to marry me or not. And obviously Charlotte's brother is like,
No, Charlotte is overjoyed to marry you, blah blah blah.
like shut up. And George is like, no, Charlotte is deciding whether or not she wants to marry me. It is her choice. And I'm like, hello, Rhysand. But yes, we obviously see George's character is just like an absolute legend, like straight off the bat, like so nice, giving her the option that, oh, what a gentleman. So they both leave, and she's left with the choice of whether or not she wants to marry George or not. And then she jumps over the wall, and that's it. The end. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, she decides to marry him, and they have like their first kiss in front of everyone, which is like very awkward, but like, it was a cute scene, so we love it. Then after that, there's like this random, like kind of suspenseful scene where like George and Charlotte are saying goodbye to all their guests, and she's introduced to Lady Danbury, who is like, you need to be careful, and if you need me, like call on me. If you need me, call me. And then leaves. So yeah, that was a very like random scene. Okay, but Lady Danbury knows as herself, like a person of colour, that this is like very precarious and new, so she wants to be there for Charlotte to help her, because obviously Charlotte like has no idea. She does not know what like the gravity of her being queen means yet. Then afterwards, George takes her to this like massive house, which he says that he's like had redecorated or had built for her, and it's called Buckingham House. I don't know if that's supposed to be like Buckingham Palace, I assume so, I don't know. And she's like, oh, so this is our house. And he's like, very clearly, no, it is your house. He says he has an estate in Kew. Never heard of that place before, but anyway, he has an estate in Kew where he shall live. So obviously he intends for them to live separately. And obviously what we've seen of him so far, we're like, Charlotte's probably thinking this is not what was advertised, like I have been scammed, which I mean like fair enough. And she is like, but it is our wedding night. Like, And he is like, it is late. And then he starts kicking off about like her wanting him to perform his like marital duties, and like storms inside the house. They start like arguing in front of all the staff who are standing there. Literally all the staff are just like, how awkward, but like also how juicy watching this argument. So they're arguing about living their like marriage separately, and he's like,
I am your king, I have decided.
And she is like, forgive me, I thought you were just George. Ooh, the burn. And then he tries to like go to her, and she steps back and is like, just get away from me. So then he leaves, and she is like left alone at this gigantic house, but she has Brimsley with her like 5 paces behind, and thought it was a bit weird. She obviously like storms off and is like walking towards her room, but I'm like, this is the first time she's ever been there, and she like knows exactly where she's going, so don't think they really thought that one through when she was filming. Wouldn't she be lost? No. But she knows exactly where she's going, so okay. And then we cut back to the future with the future Queen Charlotte. And like, I love this actress, so like nothing against her, like I love seeing her, but like these scenes are just so unnecessary. So yeah, obviously Lady Whistledown has gotten to her, and she like gathers all her like 13 children and is like calling her sons like and her daughters virgins and basically like slagging them off for like not having any children. And remember, this is just after her son's wife just died during childbirth, so she's not very sympathetic towards that. Like genuinely, it's like she forgot and like literally doesn't care. Like actually, yeah, she just gives me the whole vibe that she absolutely does not care about anyone but herself and George. And like when her son starts crying, she just like taps him and is like, sorrows, prayers, which is like her only response to if anything emotional happens. So yeah, very self-involved. And then at the end of the episode, we quickly cut back to young Charlotte lying in bed alone in Buckingham House saying, I should have gone over the wall. Oh, so sad. So yes, that was episode 1. We meet Charlotte and George, we meet Lady Danbury, we meet Brimsley. It's a good time. I honestly enjoyed episode 1 so much. Like I literally, after I watched that, I was like, next episode, binge, binge, binge. Like, oh, was so good. So yes, it did a very good job of like introducing you to all the characters, showing how the society is for people of color versus how it is for those who are not. Like the fact that the people of color don't even have any titles or anything, which is like a huge contrast to Bridgerton, where obviously we have Lady Danbury, Duke of Hastings, and all of the other families. So yeah, clearly massive contrast going on here. So it was very interesting to see all of characters, and so disgusting to see like all of the racism going on there by like all of the like members of like Parliament and the King's mother and stuff. Like, oh, so disgusting. But yes, I would say overall very good introductory episode. Like it would have been so much better if we didn't have the jumping back and forth, but yes, her and George meeting was like the cutest thing ever. Very much enjoyed that. But yes, okay, so that's the end of episode 1. So yes, let's move on to episode 2. Okay, so we begin episode 2 with Charlotte and Brimsley walking together. She's asking him like what is in her engagement diary, like operas, charity events, like queenly things that she should be doing. He tells her there is nothing, and she's obviously like, I'm the queen, like there must be something in my engagement diary. I'm a busy lady. Come on. And then, this is when it was so sad, she like realizes that this is her honeymoon. So obviously she shouldn't be doing anything because she should be enjoying her time with the king, as you know you do on a honeymoon. But she realizes she is spending her honeymoon alone. So that was very sad. We then cut to the king's mother and all of those lords talking about the great experiment, which is what they've decided to call Charlotte and George's marriage, and giving people of color titles and lands. This is emphasized by Lord Bute, that it must be a success. Like honestly, this guy's face, it's like just cracks me up for some reason. Like he's so like blah blah blah, but like his facial expressions are like hilarious. Like I don't know, his face just like cracks me up. And then we have a funny moment where like the lords are trying to like ascertain whether Charlotte and George have like consummated their marriage. And the king's mother is like, oh, it's also modern now. There used to be like 7 people in the room on her wedding night. Could you
imagine?
Whoever came up with that rule is kinky. They like watching. It's literally like live porn. And I'm pretty sure it has to be all men as well. So, you know, a freaking man created that 100%. So they can all just watch the people getting it on. Like, you know what I mean? They just want to see. And then after this, there are lots of scenes of Queen Charlotte being alone. It's actually very sad. There's like depressing music. She just spends like all her days being dressed up for dinner, then getting changed and having to be dressed up for lunch. Hairstyles, dresses, she's just like alone, eats her meals alone. And she always has like 8 men, so like 4 either side, like in those red coats with their wigs, like standing there while she eats her tea. Like why do you need like 8 men like standing either side of the table while you are eating like some soup? Like seriously? And then after this, there's like a scene where she runs away from Brimsley. Like it's kind of funny because he's like running after her like this, but like it's also very sad because she's like running away from him because she's crying because she's literally just being left alone in this huge palace for like days and days and days with like no one to speak to. And we can see Charlotte over time like getting so angry with George. Like she's at this long dining table and there's always an emphasis on this chair like where he's supposed to be sat at like the other end of the table. Like they're just shots of it being empty, and you can just tell that Charlotte every day is like getting angrier at George. So she decides, F this, I am going to go to Kew and put him in his place. So when we arrive in Kew, we see Brimsley with this tall, blonde king's man who's called Reynolds. And like we did see him in the first episode, but like I didn't really mention him because he was only in it for like 2 seconds when he was like trying to help Brimsley find Charlotte when she was like out in the garden with the king. And like when I first saw them there, I was like, a little something going on there, I think. And this is confirmed when Reynolds asks Brimsley to step indoors to warm up, as it is a very cool night. So yeah, very smooth from him. And I just have to say, his like hair is so tall. Literally like that hairstyle that you used to see like loads of girls have, where their like hair's literally like all the way up here and it's like clipped back. So I'll put a picture of him here because his hair is just so tall. But they step inside for a little you know what I'm saying? So it cuts to them in Reynolds' room. Anyways, and he is so up his own ass. He literally says,
I am more important than you.
Being the king's man, because Brimsley is like jealous of like his living quarters. So yeah, there's a little bit of tension, but then they start kissing. And then it escalates like very fast to like Reynolds sucking him off. So we'll just leave them to that. So whilst they are busy, we go to Charlotte and George in his observatory, because he like loves science and the stars and all this stuff. So he has like his own little like observatory out in the garden with a massive telescope in it. And she is like kicking off because there's like loads of empty plates of food and stuff. And she finds out that this is where he has been the entire time that she has been alone. So he has been looking at the stars instead of being with her. And like, honestly, I understand where she's coming from. Like, could you imagine, you get married, you get dropped off at this huge house, you're alone for days on end, you go see your husband and he's just been like kind of out looking at some stars instead of like spending time with you. So she is trying to explain to him that she is 17, has been like shoved into this strange land with like new customs and food, and how she cannot know anyone because she is queen, so she has to hold herself apart. And then the audacity, he is like, I really don't see what you're complaining about. Like, seriously? At this point, like, such a douchebag. Ugh. And he's all like, no, I don't want to fight. And she's like, fight with me, fight for me. And he's just like, go home. Rude. And then we have another funny scene at the palace. The king's mother has Reynolds and Brimsley there, and she's like asking about evidence of Charlotte and George's happiness. And we just know this saucy minx is fishing for information on her son's sex life.
Disgusting.
And like Brimsley and Reynolds obviously know exactly what she's asking, but they just pretend to be like stupid. And they're like, oh yes, they enjoy walks. And lots of walking, lots of laughing. Then Lord Bute is like,
have they consummated?
And Reynolds is like, certainly. Like, hello, bonjour, je m'appelle, big fat liar. And then he's so cheeky, he's like, isn't that right, Brimsley? And obviously Brimsley like can't freaking be like, no. And so he's like, oh yes, yes, they've consummated. So but like, fair enough, like what else are you gonna say? After that, I don't know how many days later it is, but we see Brimsley talking to Reynolds, like telling him how depressed the queen is, and basically saying that the king like needs to make some kind of gesture to her. He's like such a good person, like he just loves her, like, oh, so cute. So after this, George sends a letter to her saying how he never wants her to be alone, and he sends this letter along with a Pomeranian puppy, and she is like, what the hell is that? She's like, this is a deformed bunny. I myself personally prefer big dogs, given that I have a golden retriever. So cute. But yes, the dog is actually very cute that is in the show, so yeah. That was funny. But also, here is Charlotte thinking that, oh my gosh, George is so lovely. He's just sent me a gesture like out of the goodness of his heart. I'm like, no, Brimsley literally had to tell Reynolds, who then had to tell George to send you a gesture. So like, she doesn't even know what Brimsley's doing for her behind the scenes. Like, oh, he is so underrated. But despite this, she's obviously still alone. So she decides that she wants to meet her ladies in waiting. And Brimsley obviously tells her that she can only meet one, as she's supposed to be on her honeymoon. So it would have to be like very discreet. So of all the ladies, she picks Lady Danbury. So Lady Danbury comes to Buckingham House and they're having tea. And obviously Lady Danbury's like curious about being there, like on the Queen's honeymoon. And Charlotte is like, oh well, Brimsley said you would be the most discreet, like blah blah blah. And Brimsley's looking at her like, shut the hell up. He's literally like face palming, like, oh my gosh, you were not supposed to like repeat that, you absolute idiot. And then obviously she sees his face and is like,
my husband, yes, anyways, yes, he's amazing, blah blah.
Like spouting this heap of crap. And then once the girlies are like alone, Lady Danbury is like, girl, don't even try and say those lies in public, like you are awful at lying, like stop. And then they get onto the topic of like a wedding night, and Lady Danbury is like, you did have a wedding night. And Charlotte was like, oh, he was mean and rude and blah blah blah. And Lady Danbury's like, I don't care, lady, like shh, I need to know if you've consummated as well, because if she hadn't consummated the marriage, you're not like actually married. And Lady Danbury is all like, you do know what like happens on a wedding night, and Charlotte's like so confused. She has absolutely no idea. So then next we have this hilarious scene where Lady Danbury starts drawing different sex scenes with like charcoal and paper, and Charlotte's like, what the frick is this? Like turn the pages. Oh my gosh, it was hilarious. And like Brimsley is just standing there like so awkwardly, so funny. But then like Lady Danbury is also like trying to get across like, you are the first of your kind, that you need to secure your position and like consummate the marriage. Like she very clearly sees like what Charlotte being queen can like do for people of color, so she's like, you need to like secure your position. Like, oh my god, are you stupid? And then we cut back to the future with the Queen, Viscountess Bridgerton, and Lady Danbury in the Queen's like observatory, talking about like how she's going to get her children to marry. Viscountess Bridgerton obviously says like love is the answer, because like she loved her husband, and then obviously Lady Danbury absolutely cannot stand marriage. And I'm like, I'm not surprised by the scenes we have like seen so far of her when she was younger. She is like, marriage is a duty, not a pleasure, blah blah blah. So having listened to this, the Queen decides that she's gonna force all her children to marry, and then they can just like worry about the love part later. Honestly, you think though that like her being in love with George, you'd want your children to like be in love also, and not like force them to marry? Like, she was obviously forced to marry George, and yeah, like it worked out, but it like might not for your children. So like she obviously was literally gonna climb over a garden wall to escape having to marry a stranger. So like, why would you force your children into marrying strangers? Like, I just don't understand here. Then we're back in the past, and there is a confrontation with Brimsley and Reynolds. They're having a little spat. Brimsley is like asking like, what is wrong with the king to like keep him from Charlotte's bed? And then Reynolds is an absolute asshole, and he's like, you should worry about your own side of the world. And I'm like, what is that supposed to mean? So rude. Like, he is So yeah, moving on from them, we see the king's mother obviously having heard that Lady Danbury had like met with the Queen on her honeymoon. So she invites Lady Danbury to tea and is like asking about what happened. Like, she's being an absolute cow to her and is calling her Agatha. And Lady Danbury, obviously being the badass she is like, F you, and like talks right over her, and she's like, Lady Danbury. Like, the title you gave me is Lady Danbury. And then she's like, at an upcoming tea, it would be an interesting thing to mention that such titles are new for people of color like her and the Queen. And the king's mother is like, okay, fiery. So they then agree that Lady Danbury will be the king's mother's trusted ear at Buckingham House in exchange for Lady Danbury's husband being allowed into White's, which is like this social gentleman's club or something, which even though he's like been titled Lord Danbury, they still like weren't allowing him access into the club. So Lady Danbury is like, I will spy on Charlotte if you like allow my husband to be accepted into these kinds of places. And she's like, we will be equal members of the ton. And I'm like, yes, queen. Like, oh, she should be queen. She's amazing. So ballsy. Absolutely love her. But like, ooh, betraying your friend like that, I just don't know. So was not happy with her character there. Like, that was so snaky. So we then cut from Lady Danbury to Charlotte, and she is going for her usual meal. And then obviously all of the shots we've seen of the empty chair are no longer, because the chair is filled and George is here. And he's like, I want to share a meal with you. And she's like,
a meal?
And like storms away. But then he like convinces her to spend an evening with him. They go to his observatory in Kew, and they're like looking at Venus through his like telescope. And then they have a kiss, and he decides to come home with Buckingham House to live with her. So yay, progress. So after having heard all this consummation talk from Lady Danbury, who said it was not enjoyable, but like it's your duty, so like Charlotte is like, like I want to do it, but like also I don't know about this. So they go back to Buckingham House, and like she's getting all ready. So she goes to his like bedchamber, and she is literally wearing like a nightgown that has 1,000 buttons, which she tells him, and he's like, well, I'm very good with buttons. are you? But then when he was like taking it off, he didn't even have to undo any buttons. So I was like, scam. Didn't even like commit to what he said. So they had a very nice, cute like scene where they like made love. They had very sweet music. But it was like such a contrast from like Bridgerton, where all the scenes are like, they're like so impassioned, like it's very like intense. So yeah, there was a very big contrast between like the scenes we've seen in Bridgerton so far and like theirs. Theirs was like very slow and romantic. So yeah, I did prefer the other scenes in Bridgerton, but like this was very sweet and cute, so it was nice. So they've enjoyed their nice little sexy times. All is going well. After that, we have the morning after. Charlotte wakes up, but George isn't there, but she's all like happy. But then it's ruined because Charlotte is like walking down the hall and he overhears George speaking to his mother in like this room. And she obviously stops to like eavesdrop. And like George's mother is all like, have you like consummated the marriage, like all this stuff, like, oh lady, stop being so obsessed with your son's sex life, get a life yourself. And then George is like kicking off. He's like, you told me to bed her, so I have done. You told me to marry her, so I have done. And he's like, I've done all these things, like I'm the crown, I often have to act contrary to my passions. And obviously Charlotte hearing this is like, well, is he basically saying that like he has to act contrary to his passions, so that he didn't even want to like have sex with her and all this stuff? So yeah, obviously she's just thinking like he's one of his duties instead of him actually wanting to, because he like cares about her. So yeah, obviously she hears this and she's like, let's go for breakfast, we don't need to wait for the king. Oh, so sad. And then after the king's mother has left, we just see George left alone in the room. He's standing by the window, and then he like suddenly like starts shaking and like collapses like into a chair. And we see Reynolds asks if we should get the doctor, and George is like, no. But then he's like, actually no, yes, get the doctor. Like, oh, so we see obviously there is something going on with him, and George is like, Reynolds, like Charlotte, and Reynolds is like, she will never know of it. So like, oh, we can tell he is like super loyal to like George. But then like, come on, like just let Charlotte know, like let her know. So yes, that was very kind of like dramatic end to the episode. We like clearly see something is happening with George. We're finding out Lady Danbury's a bit of a snake, which I'm not happy about. Charlotte is obviously like annoyed and hurt. And I mean, you know what they say about eavesdroppers, that you're just gonna hear stuff that you don't want to hear. But then also George shouldn't have been saying it. Like he could have literally said it any other way. Like there was no need to be like acting as if it was his duty. I mean, like yes it is, but also like he clearly wanted to do it. So yeah, that was all of episode 2. So now let's go on to our last episode that we are going to be doing in this video. Let's go. Episode 3. So we begin episode 3 with Coronation Day, and Brimsley is below stairs speaking to Reynolds about where the king is. And even though Charlotte and George are not speaking, they obviously must seem united. So obviously this has been a couple of weeks, I assume, after Charlotte heard all this stuff. I wonder if George was like, why is Charlotte suddenly not speaking to me, like out of the blue, like after they had their little consummation and they were all happy, and then she's just suddenly like, no, I'm not speaking to you. So yeah, they're like very cold with each other. So Brimsley is downstairs or below stairs being like, where's the king? And then when Reynolds is like acting all suspicious and like the king is in the library, which Brimsley knows is like big fat lie, he then assumes Reynolds is here for like another reason, and he assumes Reynolds is below stairs for another rider, which is what like I assume they define their relationship as, like they're each other's riders, which I mean, fair enough, like yeah. And Brimsley is like obviously jealous, even though he's like pretending he's not, and he's like,
If you allow yourself another rider, do not think I care, but mind he is of the right station.
like he's a little snob himself, like just because he's like the queen's man, if that's what he's called, he just assumes these like below stairs just like for like peasants and stuff. I was like, Brimsley, rude. And Reynolds is like, no, I am simply below stairs, there are no other riders. And then when he can see that Brimsley's like not really believing him, he's like,
That is not what... There are no other riders.
yes, get together people, like come on. And then so Brimsley is like walking away when he like looks and sees like a cellar door, and then in that is King George being like examined by like a physician. Reynolds like craps himself and he's like blocks the door and is like, you have seen nothing. And Brimsley's just like, I must attend my queen, and walks away. And then a total jump, like we are still in the past, but like we are introduced to young Violet Bridgerton, which is like so random. But here, obviously she's not married, so her name is Violet Ledger. And straight away we can tell her mother is a racist by complaining about Lady Danbury and the other families of colour being allowed to socialise in the ton. Absolute cowbag, hate her, and so does her husband and her daughter apparently, so. And then Violet must be like 16 or something here, and she's an absolute legend because her mother is like, they are not like us and all this stuff, and Violet's like, well, they are the same as us because the palace has gifted us land and titles, and they also have gifted them land and titles, so we are exactly the same. So yes, Violet, exactly. And then we have another scene with Lady Danbury and the king's mother having one of their little tea gossip sessions. So thought I'd be annoyed at Lady Danbury here, but Lady Danbury's like, oh, Coronation Day has only brought the king and queen closer, which obviously is a big fat lie considering they are not speaking at all. So kind of glad she's not actually telling the king's mother like what is actually going on. Then we cut to the scene of Coronation Day. Yes, they're all happy, and then as soon as the doors close, they literally like walk in opposite directions and they don't speak. And then they have obviously made this arrangement off screen to only have sex on even days, because as soon as she is with child they won't have to see each other anymore. So they were totally gonna walk away, and then Reynolds and Brimsley are like basically telling them it's an even day, like you guys have got to like do the deed. And even though Charlotte is complaining to Lady Danbury like afterward that it is awful, there is a clear contrast between what is awful. Lady Danbury and her husband, ooh, that is awful, not passion and chucking George's clothes off. So she needs to like fix her definition. But despite all this passion, they are clearly still like annoyed with one another because they are like eating their meal, and then Charlotte's complaining that George is like breathing too loudly, and then they start arguing in front of all the staff again. So there's like tension, and then George gets up to leave, and then randomly, boom, start kissing in front of everyone. And then George like shoves Charlotte on the table and like starts undressing her, and mind you, there's like 10 other people in the room here. All the staff are obviously staring at each other like, what the hell do we do? Like, how mortifying. And Brimsley and Reynolds like obviously get everyone out of the room, and they're like standing outside the door. And I mean, this clearly got them turned on because we cut to Reynolds and Brimsley in Brimsley's bedchamber later on. And then we cut to another sex scene of Charlotte and George where they're now having sex in a bath, like loads of sexy times going on here. So then after all these sex scenes are finished, we cut to Brimsley and Charlotte in her orange garden, and she's like wondering why George doesn't like attend social events. So she was expecting to go to like balls and stuff, and then she was told that, oh, the king doesn't do that. So she's obviously like, well, why not? And then Brimsley is like, it could be because of the doctor, and Charlotte is like, what doctor? And then Brimsley clearly tells Reynolds that he told Charlotte about the doctor like just after they'd finished having sex, because Reynolds like gets out of Brimsley's bed like clearly raging at him, and it's like there's like nothing to know. So yeah, he's clearly very loyal to George, which is like fair enough. I really don't think he can be that annoyed at Reynolds for doing that, because he would definitely do the same thing in his position. So everyone's relationship is being like affected by all these secrets. Like, come on people, just be truthful. And this is then emphasized in the next scene where Charlotte and George have like just finished having sex, and then Charlotte asks George about the doctor, and he like shuts her down completely and is like making up some excuse that he was only being examined because the crown must be examined on Coronation Day. So yeah, she obviously doesn't believe him. We then cut back to Lady Danbury being her little scheming self, which we love. She's with the king's mother again, and she's proposing to her that herself and Lord Danbury host the first ball of the season, which obviously is like a massive deal in the ton. And she's saying this because it would be like a sign of unity among the ton, as Charlotte is not with child yet, so they need some kind of like event to bring them all together as a society. But big shocker, the king's mother is like, that is unacceptable. And then obviously Lady Danbury goes back home and tells her husband that the king's mother is not too keen on the idea, so she like comforts her husband, telling him he's like every bit as good as the white gentleman, because like even though she doesn't like her husband, she's also totally understands where like he's coming from and like the struggles he's been through. So the fact that she comforts him was like very sweet. So obviously after having had this conversation with him, she is like, flip flip this shit and she decides to send out invitations to the ball by herself and basically screw what the king's mother says. She is having this ball. And then we have another flash forward scene to Lady Danbury and Viscountess Bridgerton in a church, and Violet is telling her that it would have been her husband's birthday, so she's like lighting a candle for him, and then she starts speaking about like hats that Violet used to make for her husband, and we can like see this hat conversation is like affecting Lady Danbury in some way, but obviously like, she's trying not to show it and she's being like very weird, so yeah, note that. So obviously Violet is like reminiscing about her husband, like missing him, and then Lady Danbury's like, you are most fortunate, and obviously Violet's like, what the frick? Obviously thinking she must have meant it in like a mean way, because here you are like reminiscing about your dead husband, and then Lady Danbury's being like, you're most fortunate, like what? But obviously we as the audience know that she is saying that she is most fortunate to have had a husband like that, to have been in love and like had a wonderful marriage, instead of, as Lady Danbury had, being like forced into a marriage and like forced to have sex with her husband and like being treated as like a lesser woman. So yeah, like we obviously understand where she's coming from, but Viscountess Bridgerton is like raging at her. So I mean, fair enough. So after that like weird confrontation, we are back in the past. We have a cute scene with Charlotte and George where we learn more about his character, which is very sweet. She like confronts him about like how he spends his time. There's a massive airplane. He tells her that he farms, so he like plants vegetables and plants and things. He is Farmer George. So this was actually very refreshing to see like a king who enjoys like being out in the country. Like personally, I love being in the country, so refreshing to see that like he enjoys spending his days going out and like gardening and not like getting other people to do it for him, which Charlotte thinks is obviously beneath her. Like, oh god forbid she'd like touched a vegetable. So yeah, it's very interesting to see like a royal character, especially a king, who's like that, because usually in these kinds of things, I think it was like with the Duke of Hastings or like Anthony, they were all like, oh, it's all paperwork, like I'm so busy I simply cannot see you because I'm doing paperwork, whereas he is like, I simply cannot see you because I'm planting a carrot. So yeah, he is growing on us, like we are enjoying him. And following this, obviously Lady Danbury sent out all her invitations to her ball. There has been like an uproar of the ton at this. So yeah, obviously they're all kicking off at Lady Danbury being a person of color, like being allowed to host the first ball of the season, because like, oh, what scandal. So like basically no one is going to Lady Danbury's ball. So she obviously tries to speak to Charlotte about this, but Charlotte keeps interrupting because she's busy looking out the window at George farming, which I mean like fair enough, but also rude. She's literally so self-obsessed, like it's annoying. Like I actually genuinely sometimes really don't like her character, and her self-obsession is literally emphasized like 2 seconds later when she is like to Lady Danbury, I don't see how the king's mother making you cancel your ball like affects me. Bitch, it's not about you. And then Lady Danbury like gets all up in her face and Charlotte's like, oh, what are you doing? And she's like, listen, how do you not see us? She explains to Charlotte how her becoming queen has opened doors for them, and she's like, you need to look out for our side instead of being like a simpering girl who's like only obsessed with like George basically. And she says to her, your palace walls are too high, which is probably like one of the most important quotes in the show, I think. So she puts her in her place. She's like, your palace walls are too high. You have absolutely no idea what's going on. You're just too obsessed about George like farming outside and not paying attention to like what is happening to the rest of the people who are like relying on you to help us become like equal. Honestly, what a freaking legend. Absolutely love Lady Danbury. Like, come on, tell her. So after Lady Danbury being a badass, we then cut to a scene with Brimsley and Reynolds, who are guarding the door whilst Charlotte and George get on inside, and they're obviously not speaking, and Brimsley like moves closer and like tries to like touch Reynolds' hand. So he's like this and Reynolds' hand is like this, and then Brimsley tries to go like this and Reynolds is like, oh, takes it away. It's so savage. I felt so sad for him there. Oh my gosh, his little face was so sad. But then Reynolds puts his hand down and they just stand like touching hands like this because they can't be together, which is like so sad. So they just have to like steal their little moments when they can. But yeah, oh, honestly, they're literally like my favorite ship. So after Charlotte and George finish their like fun times, Charlotte says that there will be no more even days, and that she now finally understands like the burden George bears. Obviously the conversation with Lady Danbury like got something into her brain, so now she understands where George is coming from, and she says to him like he doesn't owe her anything after the way she's behaved. And I'm like, I wrote in my notes, like at this point, that like I don't even know like what on earth she is apologizing for, because he's the one who literally left her alone for like days on end, wouldn't spend his like wedding night with her, basically like shut her off from everyone. So like at this point, episode 3, yeah, no, I was like, why the hell are you apologizing? So honestly, I thought she was totally justified. So I randomly lost this footage for some reason. It's literally like 2 minutes, but it vanished off the face of the earth. So I'm just jumping in here to fill in like the random footage that we're missing. So sorry about that. So random. So anyways, I think where I left off, Charlotte was saying to George that he doesn't owe her anything. So after that, she asks him to do something for her. Then we cut to Lady Danbury's ball, which obviously she hasn't cancelled, so I think everyone found out that the Queen and the King were going, so they all decided to come, or like the Queen endorsed it or something, because she has it anyway, so I assume the Queen like intervened in some way. So anyways, we're at the ball where Lord Ledger and his wife greets Lord and Lady Danbury, and Lord Ledger is praising Lady Danbury for the social event of the season and that they should be friends. After that, there was like no mingling between any of the ton. However, when Charlotte and George arrive and they start dancing, then Lord Ledger goes over to Lady Danbury and asks her for a dance. So then both sides like come together and like start mingling and dancing. So we have a very cute scene where everyone's just all like dancing together, like united as a society. So this obviously signifies a great change in like the Great Experiment, and that it seems to be working, as the Ton have clearly now begun to embrace Lady Danbury and the other families of colour from watching Charlotte and George together. So even them like turning up to that ball for one night has literally just made like a gigantic change in like uniting all the families of the Ton. So big changes here. And then once the ball is over, as the evening has been such a success, Lord Danbury then takes Lady Danbury to go and have sex. Ugh. But I have been waiting for this. Like I knew this was gonna happen. So they are having sex and he like finishes basically, and he has a heart attack and dies. Like I knew this was gonna happen, and like thank God too, honestly. I mean, he certainly went out with a bang. I know that line is so typical, but like you've just got to say it. You just got to say it. So Lady Danbury then like is obviously like, my lord, like what the hell is happening? And then she sees him like dead on the floor. And then she goes out to her lady's maid, who she's like pals with, like they're friends, and she's like, yes girl, and they're like bouncing around like hugging each other with joy, like he's dead and it's like over. And then obviously she has to go like back in the room and then like pretend he's like just died, and she's like screaming the house down that he's dead, and like great acting from her part, very believable. And the lady's maid is like, oh no, my lady, what's happened? So yeah, that was funny. But anyway, she's like screaming the house down, but I feel so happy for her. She's obviously been waiting for ages for her husband to like clock it, so yay. And then we cut to the future again with Violet and Lady Danbury having tea, with obviously Violet being very passive aggressive after the last time she saw Lady Danbury. She obviously told her that she was most fortunate to be like grieving her husband basically. So obviously she's been like very passive aggressive towards her, like, oh how kind of you that when I told you I couldn't make it to tea that you sent your own carriage, blah blah blah. And then obviously Lady Danbury explains to her that she like loathed her husband, and she was saying that she is most fortunate for having a husband who loved her and who didn't treat her as like a prized mare just for breeding, and that her heart starves for love, whilst Violet's is like full. Quite an emotional scene, and obviously Violet is like, oh, and feels so sorry for her. Oh, and I think I forgot to mention that Lady Danbury was like promised to her husband when she was 3 years old. So he must have been like, if he's like old to her now, he must have been like 40 or 50 or something when she was like promised him as a 3-year-old. Like, I'm sorry, what creep decides to marry or get engaged to a 3-year-old? Like, oh, disgusting. So yes, that was a very emotional scene, but not as emotional as the next few scenes. Like, oh, we are still in the future here. So we cut to the Queen and Brimsley, like obviously older, and she's like wondering why her daughters like haven't married, and he's like brutally honest with her and is saying that they have never married because they could not leave their mum trapped living in time as George's queen. So that was emotional, but then we're like thinking, what does he mean? And then we cut back to young Charlotte, and she's like being awoken by George, like scribbling on the walls. He's like acting all erratic, and he's like twitching and like mumbling to himself. And then when she like tries to approach him, he's just like talking away, and then he like goes out in the hallways and they walk past a servant, and she's like, oh no, George is just working, like it's fine. Obviously she has no idea what's going on, and that servant like runs and like tells Reynolds and Brimsley like the king and queen are up, and Reynolds obviously knows what's going on and instructs Brimsley to like lock away all the servants like downstairs, like, and guard the garden, like don't let anyone see anything. And so George has like run outside into the garden. He's only in his nightgown, and he's like shouting, I see you, Venus, like I see you, my angel. He starts like taking off his clothes. So he's like kneeling in the dirt saying that like Venus is here. Charlotte's trying to talk to him. Reynolds then comes out with like a blanket or something and is like trying to cover him up, and he just has no idea what's going on, and he just keeps telling her like, look, there's Venus, like say hello. But like Charlotte takes the like blanket off Reynolds, and she's like, Farmer George. She's being like very good with him. He's like, there's Venus, and she's like, no, I'm Venus, basically like playing into his like fantasy. So she manages to get him inside. Reynolds is like watching on with like his face is like heartbroken, because obviously he knows that George never wanted Charlotte to see him like this, so it's very sad. I literally did actually cry when watching that scene, like it was very emotional. So yeah, it was like very sad. So the episode ends like that. So yes, we have George not in his right mind. Charlotte obviously sees him like this for the first time, so the cat's out of the bag. So we obviously knew he like lacked any capacity in like Bridgerton, but now we're seeing him for the first time, and like Charlotte realizing that he's like mentally unstable. So yes, it was very emotional. So yes, we have that being revealed. We have the massive change in the Great Experiment. We have Lord Danbury like clocking it, adios. So yes, all in all, a very emotional like episode. So even from like episodes 1 to 3, like even from the first episode, you saw that there was like no unity with the Ton, and then obviously in episode 3 we're now like united as a society, like everyone's being more accepting. People of color can now get into like the only white clubs that it was previously or whatever. So we're all united now as a society. We can see Charlotte and George relationship having like gone from kind of cute to then not cute and not speaking to then being cute again, and now facing all these like unknown troubles. So yes, my thoughts so far. I honestly binged these episodes so fast, and I am enjoying like learning about all of their characters. So yes, I feel like it's very interesting to see like Lady Danbury's backstory and Violet Bridgerton's backstory and the Queen's backstory, like, and Brimsley and Reynolds. They are literally like my favorite ships. So obviously I love the Queen and George, very cute, but like I love Brimsley and Reynolds, like they're so sweet. Honestly, Brimsley is my favorite character, and I do appreciate Reynolds' loyalty, so like I love him. So they're very cute, and actually in real life, obviously Reynolds and the King are like close, and then in real life the actors like got so close that they like moved in together like as friends. So yeah, I thought that was pretty sweet. But yeah, very good episodes from 1 to 3. So yes, episodes 1 to 3. I like love Lady Danbury's character. She was well developed. Queen Charlotte, I feel like she's so obsessed. Like I did enjoy her, but also I feel like you don't really get anything from her up until the end of episode 3, and that's when you really see like, oh, she can manage to care for George. Like she handled the situation very well, but for the rest of it, honestly, like I felt for her when she was alone. Obviously she was getting depressed, so yes, I feel for her, but obviously her character with not really knowing on what's going on outside was very like self-obsessed, and I didn't really enjoy that. So I did enjoy the exploration of some characters, but I do feel like her character could have been like elaborated on a bit more. So yeah, in terms of the verdict on the episodes 1 to 3, I am gonna say that the verdict is an 8.5 out of 10. And I am also giving this based on the jumping back and forth between the past and the present, future, whatever. Yeah, that like took down the marks for me personally. Like, did not enjoy all this jumping around, as I've previously mentioned. So yeah, that's what brought it down for me. But overall, like, the first 3 episodes were so good, and obviously I kept binge watching it, so it was very good. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the first 3. Very good, and some interesting characters. So yes, I'll see you guys for part 2, which we'll be talking about episodes 4 and 5, and then going over my thoughts on everything as a whole. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video, and I will see you for part 2.